So the man joins in 2006. Khabib doesn't join until 2012. Anderson Silva was a huge star all those years. Khabib joins, has his entire career, his rise to fame, his rise to glory, everything. Meanwhile, Anderson is still up there. Khabib is the champion. He defends, he has the Conor fight, the Dustin fight, the Gaethje fight, wins all that shit, retires. Silva's still around. This week, Silva retires. Silva was a legend for longer than Khabib was in the UFC. Last question, the kind of classic question. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, where does Anderson Silva fit among the all-time greats? You can't move on past Anderson Silva's retirement without asking where he stands. And of course, I think that one of the big kind of key factors here is what you think about his steroid allegations. I mean, he was caught. He had a fight overturned. I believe he was suspended for a little bit. So we can talk.
Fail fight.
Yeah, that was a Nick Diaz fight. So we can talk about whether or not A, he was using earlier in his career. B, whether it matters if he was using earlier in his career, because a lot of the guys he was fighting were definitely using. We're talking about Vitor Belfort over here. And just even without that, where does he stand? How do you compare him to a guy like Jon Jones or a GSP or even a Khabib like we saw last week?
The guys who don't ever pop for steroid use and guys like Khabib, guys like GSP, where, it just seems so out of the question that these guys would be using substances. They're just such honorable guys. They'll always, to me, be, closer to the top of that list of the greatest of all time. But, there is something to be said for the fact that when you get to the top levels of really any kind of athletic competition, you got to assume that most people are on something or the other. They're using some kind of, extracurricular to improve their performance.
I mean, pre-USADA especially.
Yeah, for sure. Early UFC, no fucking question. Absolutely.
Prime Silva time, right? I mean, Chael himself says he was on everything.
Yeah. So I with that in the context, that definitely plays a role into how I feel about Silva as the GOAT. But one important thing you got to look at, and I mean, sure, the game evolves and, people catch up to each other in terms of skills, and people who once looked untouchable, they fall behind eventually. But when it came to his prime, the prime of his career compared to other fighters in the prime of their careers at any point, who can you point at who's looked even close to as not just dominant? Anderson Silva could make his opponents look like they've never once fought a single time in their life.
I have one answer for you, and that's Khabib.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
It's Khabib.
Yeah.
Maybe Jon, but even Jon was caught in that armbar against Vitor.
Yeah. Jon has faced more
adversity
in his career, and not even just at that very tail end of his career where he arguably lost 2 fights in a row, but one of whom was against someone who didn't have any knees. But I think that kind of paints a bit of a negative image over Jones for me, but just the extent to which Anderson made people look like fools. I recommend everybody to go. Sorry?
Do you mind if I interrupt you for a second there? And no, sorry, Adam, I know you haven't gone yet, so we want to make sure you have a chance to go. But I was just thinking, a lot of people do remember those unbeatable, that Vitor moment, right? The front kick to the face. But I think Anderson wasn't quite as untouchable as maybe we're remembering him. I mean, there's that Damian Maia fight that everyone knows in Abu Dhabi was super, super slow and boring. There was, I forget there was another couple fights that were just really weird, and Dana was pissed at him for a while. Yeah, that Vitor fight was huge, but even in the Chael fights, right? He almost was beaten by Chael twice. Yeah, he came out and had those crazy
no, he was
comebacks.
almost beaten by Chael once.
The
second fight was more one-sided towards him.
Okay,
fine. Chael may have wrote the book on how to beat Anderson by just complete pushing forward and wrestling him.
But no,
you can't fall for his intimidation trap.
I know. So what I'm saying is that you were saying that he looked like he was unbeatable, untouchable. Well, Chael for 4.5 rounds dominated him. He wasn't unbeatable. He was
the first one to do it.
But no one did it to Khabib. But nobody's done that to Khabib in the slightest. And even Jon Jones hasn't even had those moments where he thought he was going to lose and he was being dominated. He thought, oh, there's a chance he could lose. With Anderson, it was like, oh my God, Anderson is about to lose. And then he somehow came back. Even Jon never got to the, oh my God, Jon's guaranteed about to lose. It's, oh, a scorecard might have gone in someone else's favor, whether it's Thiago Santos or Dom Reyes, or Gustafsson if you want to go early back then.
I think that. Oh, sorry, Adam, you go ahead.
I was just gonna jump in and say it also has to do with the weight of like which discipline, each fighter specializes in. Like Anderson Silva would have dominated anybody, in the clinch and his kickboxing and stuff like that. Same with Khabib and his wrestling. So obviously Khabib was able to employ his wrestling throughout his entire career, and like that was his only offense, and that's how he just smashed all his opponents. But when it came to Anderson, although his strength was his clinch work and his kickboxing, when he got taken down, that's where he had a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm. Khabib didn't even have issues on the feet, because yes, he might have looked like his striking was. Like the actual mechanics of his striking don't look as smooth or as high level necessarily as the other guys. Yeah, he looks a little clunky. He looks a lot less more unorthodox, but it's effective. The actual,
for sure.
And so he's not being dominated on the feet, even when he is on the feet. Maybe that's because of the wrestling and the threat of the wrestling. I would argue absolutely he'd get destroyed by Conor in a boxing match, in a pure boxing match. But that doesn't matter, because he didn't have any part of his game where he ended up actually getting beaten because of that wrestling. Whereas Silva, he did have at least one aspect where he was being beaten that was on the ground. Even on the feet, Khabib couldn't be beaten because there was the threat of the wrestling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Khabib is absolutely, like, arguably top GOAT of all time. One important aspect I think about Anderson, which, because like I spoke on kind of, I think the last time we had this GOAT discussion, is that at the end of the day, when people come so close, there's a lot of subjectivity in your rankings. So one important factor for me that I look at with Silva is the degree to which he has influenced other fighters. And Khabib, we're going to see that influence come very much in the coming years with like a bunch of the new contenders that we see.
Already
we already see people like they tie up the legs when they're on the ground.
The cross leg and the Dagestani handcuff is everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere now. So I think that will see more of over the next coming years. But right now, we can say with certainty that a lot of people, I think that they addressed this kind of in one of the interviews that maybe the Dana interview. But like a lot of guys who would have gone into other sports, and I am directly paraphrasing someone else here, they would have gone into other directions. But Anderson Silva led these people to MMA. They saw him and they were inspired by him. And
there's the Michael Jordan. Right?
Yes, is a whole generation of fighters that owe everything to Anderson Silva. So I think that plays a very important role as to why today he is maybe the number one greatest of all time. Just we can see, and Khabib, as we look back at his legacy, he's absolutely going to be on top of the list. But it's kind of like that whole thing of, I'm going to use a music parable here. If a new album comes out and it's extremely good and ground shaking, sure, it's amazing, ground shaking. It may have classic potential, but until it has a couple of years behind it, you can't call it a classic right away. Khabib, I'd say, in a couple of years, his legacy will, be more apparent in just how his style has, moved the game forward. And, people will absolutely be having these same kind of conversations. But Silva just has so much history behind him. He's led this whole generation of fighters forward, possibly more so than anyone else. It's like the Velvet Underground of fighting. It's just like everyone, he inspired like everything that came after him.
Yeah.
He elevated the game.
And I think there is something to be said in addition that that he has over Khabib. I mean, this is something that you can debate whether he has over Khabib, because you just haven't seen, as you mentioned, what influence Khabib will have for the next 10 years, like we've seen with Anderson. But what Anderson has over Khabib is the longevity. Think of the fact that Anderson was the mega superstar, the biggest thing in the UFC before Khabib joined the UFC. And he had that title for a few years, right? Khabib didn't join until 2012, right? Anderson was massive way before then. What year? Do you guys know what year he joined? I'm actually not sure. I should have checked. But he was already a huge star way before then. Let's actually check that.
Yeah, let's get a look at that.
I'm really curious.
I'll tell you one thing. Khabib learned English faster than Anderson Silva did, so maybe he's
2006.
He's the GOAT at that right now.
I believe it was 2006. It was his
Okay,
first
what
ever
was it?
fight. Okay, well, so there we are. So the man joins in 2006. Khabib doesn't join until 2012. Anderson Silva was a huge star all those years. Khabib joins, has his entire career, his rise to fame, his rise to glory, everything. Meanwhile, Anderson is still up there. Khabib is the champion. He defends, he has the Conor fight, the Dustin fight, the Gaethje fight, wins all that shit, retires. Silva's still around. This week, Silva retires. Silva was a legend for longer than Khabib was in the UFC. That's how long this. There's longevity to that career. It's something that Khabib didn't come close to, and it's something that only Jon Jones has, and GSP has, up to the level of Anderson. And maybe not even to that point. Just the number of title defenses, the number of middleweight title fights. Just the longevity is something that no one else other than Jon Jones and GSP have come close to, and maybe DJ.